Okay, so kind of like I threatened, this talk's going to be a bit of a whirlwind. So good news is you do have a reference guide at the end in case it's too hard to keep up with your hands and writing notes. So welcome to Don't Start Work, Start Teams. My name's Ryan Ladden. Before we jump into the meat of this talk, which is how to facilitate a 3 or 4 day workshop to launch a successful team, just a little bit about me. This is the picture you'll find everywhere of me on social media and everything else. That is me eating a squid. It is disgusting. Never try it. This QR code you'll see it at the end. If you scan it, that will get you straight to the reference guide. But again, it'll be there at the end. I was able to scan it from the back of the room, so I know it'll work at least that capacity, and the slides will be available later. Get a hold of me down there. You can do that. It'll also be provided at the end. Instead of talking about what I do, where I work, things like that, I'll just talk a little bit about my passions really quickly. So professionally speaking, my mission is to create teams that can change the world, which sounds a bit like corporate speak that's on the wall that everyone ignores. I think of it as a scoping problem. So the idea would be that if I can change the world for someone right in front of me, that's great. If I can change the world for a couple people like that, maybe I change the world for a team. If they take that same mission on themselves, maybe they change the world for one customer, or their boss, or some stakeholder. And they keep doing that, and they change the world for a different group of people, a whole customer segment, a region, a division, a community, and so on, and they're well on their way to the world. So that's how I think of it. Also, it's a little corporate speaking. In my personal life, passionate about my family. I have a wife and a 3-year-old son. They were here with me until yesterday when I was hurrying to get into the airport. Love them to death. Also, bees. Really fascinated by honeybees. Is there any beekeepers in the room? Any aspiring beekeepers in the room? One day. One day. Yes, this is cool. We can geek out about bees all day long. I don't have them yet, so I'm just aspiring also. Yeah. The last thing is games of all kinds, video, tabletop, role-playing games. Someday I think I'm going to try to give a talk of everything I learned about being a Scrum Master, I learned from being a Dungeon Master, but that is so embarrassing. I am not ready for that. No way.
That should have been the topic today.
Yeah, I'm working on it. Just every time I submit, I'm like, is this the time? No. This talk is going to be about how to launch a team, facilitating a workshop. And I'll try to cover a little bit about how long your workshop should be depending on the circumstances, but we'll see how the timing works. But why would you do it? In the blurb I put about it, doing a 3-day boot up can save you 8 months of trouble. That's based on an experience they had at one client. Most recently, I booted up a team, and within 3 months, that same team that I booted up was 30% better than the teams that had not been booted up. So this has a profound impact in my experience of setting up teams to be more successful more quickly and bounce back when the world has a tendency to knock you back down. So with that, we're going to get into how to facilitate one of these things. So get ready. So I'm going to break this down into a couple areas, and it's roughly the pieces of facilitation. So we're going to start with the pre-work, the work you have to do before you start to try to facilitate a team lift off, boot up, or workshop. We'll use all those terms interchangeably. Then we're going to talk about how to open the room and open each day as a facilitator. Then we're going to talk about the meat, which is all of the activities we facilitate, and I'm going to try to tell you about a dozen of them and how to facilitate every one of them, if I can keep my voice going. And then the last thing, how do you close the day, and then finally the follow-up. So that's the basic structure of how this talk is going to go. So let's jump into the pre-work. First thing you probably need to work on is facilities, and I say that because I never do it this way, and it always gets me into trouble. Facilities is the reason I say you need to find that first, is most companies or organizations don't have the right room, and especially not for 3 solid days of time. So finding that can be one of the hardest things to get first, and you do not want a room like this. If you can avoid it at all costs, do not get a room with a fixed table and fixed chairs. You would prefer to have a room where you can move chairs and tables around. That gives you a lot of flexibility for activities. And if you study a lot of facilitation, you'll find that you can set up the room configuration in a way that enables more collaboration. These kinds of rooms tend to have a certain amount of viciousness to them. There's certain power dynamics that exist. It's a little bit weird. You can run workshops like this. I've done it. It's just a little harder to do. So start with the room. You may get some interesting constraints when you find out you can only have a room for 2 days. Other interesting note, think about finding rooms off-site. It may be pretty cheap to get a room from another office in the same building, or go off-site to a hotel or something like that. I'm always surprised at how easy that is to do, and I always have to remember to go look. So that's the first thing, is get your facilities in order. Second thing you'll need is to create a purpose. The Purpose of the workshop. This is a statement, and it needs to be something that resonates with people. Something that they would say, you know what, I do want to spend 3 days doing that, because pretty soon you're going to have to walk into some room with somebody and say, hey, I think we should get in a room for 3 days and have a meeting. And they're going to say, why? This is why. You're going to have a purpose statement. And the main thing about it is it has to be something that is relevant to people. A purpose cannot be to start a team. No one cares. No one would pay for that. It has to be something they care about. So this is one I ripped from the last team I booted up, which was 2 weeks ago, and everything about those circumstances was terrible. But this is the purpose that I created for them, and they were like, cool, let's do that. They were very nervous about the word radical, but the purpose was to create a team with a chance of radical success in the next 6 months. They're like, really? Radical though? How about just mediocre success? But you need one of these. The reason you need one, you're going to have to interview people. This is the step that many people don't know about or forget or skip. Please do not do that. The main reason you need to interview people is so that you have no surprises when you're doing this workshop. When you interview people, you'll be finding out about themselves, the dynamics that play across other people, the sort of predisposition some people have, like managers, to come pull half a team out of the workshop because they have a burning need to ask them a question and interrupt everything you've got. So you want to know these people and you want to know what's going on so there's no surprises from you facilitating for 3 or 4 or 2 days or an hour or whatever. So the first set of interviews you'll need to do is with a sponsor. Sponsors are anyone that can essentially influence the shape of your workshop or boot up. These are your managers. These are the people that can give you budget to go get the room, to go buy snacks, to say, yeah, I think you could do that, but I need these 2 key people out of the room for half the time. These are your sponsors. You need them to buy in and support you doing this. And you also have to find out some things about, hey, how long could we do this? What's the time horizon for this product thing, that our first launch, or what's our budget, or whatever. You need to know these things from your interview. And in the workshop, in the reference guide, I have interview questions for you. So they'll be there, and you can vary them. But if you skip a sponsor interview, I would say be prepared for them to show up and ruin your day. This has happened to me more than I care to admit. I've had to cancel workshops because a sponsor who was not supposed to be in the room came in and destroyed it. So you want to know these people first, and you want to get them set up correctly. Next set of interviews is going to be about everybody, but the broad picture about what you're going to be learning is you need to know about them. Who are these people? What do they think? What do they think about the team they've been put on? What do they think about agility? You want to know these people. You also want to know about their opinions and sort of dispositions about the other people they work with. And the other thing you want to know is about the meeting. Who are these people in a meeting room? What do they need to be in a meeting for 3 days and not want to kill themselves? I asked point blank, like, is there any kind of snack I can provide that would make your time better? What about a drink? What about music? Do you want pipe cleaners to fidget with? Anything I can ask that would make this time more pleasant, I will ask them about it. And these questions also exist in the interview guide. But you have to do this for every person that you think you're booting up. If you're booting up multiple teams, this could take a long time, but please don't skip it. Certainly you can delegate it out to other people, but do the work. You do not want to find out that what was a personal thing that happened. I went and interviewed a bunch of people, and teammates said they absolutely did not want to be in the same room as other parts of the team. They did not want to be in them. They hated them. Hated them. Really good to find that out before I put them in the room. 2 questions that I'll have in my interview guide that I want to draw special attention to, very much related to what I just said, is who do you want to be in the room? This question, even if you don't know the lay of the land you're in very well, will give you a very good idea of who are key stakeholders, who are the other people that need to be in attendance, why they think that. You'll get a pretty good idea of the sort of structure of the organization through this, and you'll be able to build your attendance list very easily, as well as your interview list. The other question, and this one you probably need to ask behind closed doors, who do you not want in the room? Pay very close attention when you ask that question, because you will find out a lot of things that you need to be very wary of. Most of the time, the answer you'll get is they don't want their manager in a room. And that's not because there's necessarily anything they're worried about, but if this is a team liftoff, they want it to be for the team, and they don't want outside influence. Sometimes it may not be that nice. Sometimes it may be that they simply cannot work effectively with their manager because they don't trust them or they can't be themselves. When you ask the question, you have to be prepared for that answer and think about how you're going to deal with that. I have had to go talk to managers and tell them they cannot join the meeting. I have had to kick them out of the room when they did anyway. This is kind of a big deal. And like I said, I have had teammates say they didn't want their own teammates in the room because of years of bad working habits. I had to figure out how to navigate that one too. But this is all part of not having surprises when you walk into the room. You need to know that that dysfunction exists. So that's interviewing. Let's talk about planning. This is probably the part we all thought about pre-work. And before I jump into how I plan actually the agenda, common question is how long does it take to do all this pre-work for a workshop? Rule of thumb, twice as long as the workshop would be. So if this is a 3-day boot up, 6 days would be what I would say is how long it should take. Now you might say that's ridiculous, and maybe it is. The more you do it, the less time it tends to take, but I would say treat it as a challenge that if you gave yourself 6 days to prepare for a 3-day workshop, how much more prepared could you be? How many less variables would you be dealing with at the time? So I tend to do that even to this day after having done a lot of these. So how I plan the agenda, I use questions. I ask questions. So if the purpose was to create a team with a chance of radical success in 6 months, the question that would be related to that is, are we ready to start as a team with a chance of radical success in 6 months? Then I would say, well, what question would I ask right before that? Well, are you ready to start? Do you have what you need? Do you know what the work is? Do you know what process you're going to follow? Do you know what rules you're going to have? Do you know how you're going to work together? I would just keep asking questions in succession, working backwards from the end all the way to the beginning. And this picture here is kind of showing how that looks to me is these things turned to be diamonds. Those are the questions. And there's actually 2 columns of them. I just got too lazy to turn them. I don't know. But that's that. Those 2 columns of questions. And I usually wind up with somewhere between 20 to 40 questions. And I'll wind up sifting them, grouping them, saying these aren't actually going to be relevant, but the questions form a narrative spine to the agenda. Everything flows naturally, where one activity answers the question which leads to the next one. That's why I plan this way. Everything you see to the next side of it are options for activities I can use that allow the teams or the room to answer the question themselves. Most of the time when I do these, there's actually no PowerPoint slides. There's nothing like that. They just move from activity to activity, each one giving them an answer to the question, leading to the next. And I also provide a lot of options for myself because I might be wrong in my plan and they will let me know that I need an alternative. So this gives me sort of a whole bunch of ammunition to think about. So once I have the questions, I brainstorm activities. I'll hone in on the sort of best guess of activities. You'll find some activities do a lot of questions at once, stuff like that. You identify the timings, which will be a little tricky to figure out the first couple of times, because you need to think about how long it takes to facilitate it. Some gotchas around that would be, how long will it take to set up or transition from the last? That's a certain amount of time. Starting it up, distributing materials, executing it, and then a debrief. That's what I think of when I'm keeping timings for it, all those pieces. And then you need to figure out what materials you need so you can have it gather. That's pre-work. That's 6 days of effort, 3 days spent. Now we're ready to actually talk about getting into the day. The day begins, how we open. Now, from this point on, I'm going to actually see if I can make this a little more interactive. For the amount of content I'm about to try to explain in terms of facilitating all these activities, it's really hard for me to get through all of it in an hour. So I'm going to introduce an activity. I'll put my hand up. If you're familiar with the activity and don't want me to explain it, put your hand up. If you want me to explain it, keep your hand down, and I will arbitrarily decide the number of hands that means to skip it. But like I said, everything I'm about to cover is in the guide. So just think about it. No big deal either way. And if you don't put any hands up, I will just go as fast as I can through this. So let's talk about opening a room. 2 openings exist. There's the formal opening to the whole session, and then there's a daily opening. You need both, and they're both very similar. You'll just do less of one than the other. So the first thing, check-in. Who knows about check-ins? All right. 2 hands, not enough. We're doing it. So check-in is a simple little activity, usually one question that we ask that allows people to sort of stop whatever they were thinking of when they came into the room and think about something in the room. Like it just stops, like if the workshop started at 9 in the morning and people are coming in for their commute, they're probably still thinking about whatever they were thinking about in their commute. They're not ready to start. But the check-in is a question that sort of derails that train of thought immediately and gets them thinking about here. So the classic one is called the weather check. And it goes something like this. Every one of you has a personal weather system inside of you, your own sort of weather. And I want each person in the room to just say, what's your weather forecast today? And you may need to start them off like, today I am blustering winds. And then everyone goes. You can ask other questions like, what kind of animal are you today? Or what would you like to get out today? Or what are you terrified of right now? Anything, any one question that sort of stops them from thinking about whatever was in their mind before. There's a whole bunch of these. So that's a check-in. The next thing you'll have to do is introduce the purpose. You'll need to do this for the main opening, not so much the daily openings, but put it up there like, this is the purpose, right? This is why we're here. That makes sense? That what we want? Are we cool? Just make sure that this is actually what they signed up for. More than likely, this should not be an issue because this will have come out in every one of your interviews when they said, why are we getting in the room for 3 days? You will have had to tell them this. So this won't be a surprise to them. But cover it, because what you'll need is everything from this point on points back to your purpose, so you can adjust. If we're not doing something that gets us to our purpose, change it. If we're having a conversation not related to the purpose, change it. This is a direction the entire time of the workshop. From there, we introduce the agenda. This is from my most recent one, mid-battle. When I communicate agendas, I basically only present the timings for major points. The beginning, the end, lunch breaks. It's the only timings I provide. And other than that, the actual agenda items, people are good at putting those out there in a way that's communicative. I am not one of these people, so I put whatever out there that makes sense to me, and then I'll walk through what we're going to do, and just make sure people understand it. And then the question at the end is, does this agenda seem like it could get us to our purpose? If there's anything you think is missing, what is it? Then I'll write it down somewhere. So this agenda is interesting because we went through the first day, everything was great. Second day, by the end of it, something had gone wrong. And I actually had to adjust our third day's agenda to deal with things that they decided was more important than what I provided. And that's why we do this. Every day we can adjust the corrections. That's also why you did all those extra options in your planning, is so you're prepared to change midstream. So that's the agenda. Cover it. After it seems reasonable, move on. Working agreements come next. Working agreements are just the rules we're going to hold ourselves in the room for. The keynote had these. Like, what are we going to bind ourselves to make sure this room is successful? And when I start these off, I start with 2. There's Elmo, which is enough. Let's move on. And it's just a way for a room to self-police that they've gotten all the value out of the discussion at hand, ready to go to the next thing. I'd say teams find that very helpful, and they use it forever once I start them with it. Low tech is the other one. Some people say no tech, but I work in technology, so I think that's kind of ridiculous. So I say low tech, and what it means is, hey, we're here when you're sitting on a laptop or you're playing on your phone, you're not paying attention to the rest of your team. So be mindful that might be disrespectful. If something does come up, be an adult and leave the room and deal with it and come back. And we will take enough breaks that you can probably deal with it. One thing I forgot to mention with the agendas, so there's the major like lunch breaks. The other break that comes up is every 45 minutes to an hour and a half, I'll have a bio break, 5 to 10 minutes. And that roughly corresponds to 2 to 3 activities. So it's pretty easy to judge. We can just say, hey, it's time, let's go. And we do that. And that helps a lot. So that's low tech and Elmo. So I see the working agreements with these 2, and then say, what else? What other rules do we need in this room to be successful? And anyone can shout out whatever they want. I'll ask them for an example. The room agrees. Write it on up. And that's it. And then we do that, and I'll say Elmo, and then, yeah, we're done, we move on. And that's it. And the idea behind this is that this is something the room holds themselves, not me to police them. This takes a little bit of, maybe you have to handhold them a little bit, but this is their rules, not mine. Last thing is parking lots. Anyone familiar with parking lots? Got a lot more hands. Skipping it! All right. So with that, you have open the room. So that's the formal opening, the daily openings, purpose, agenda, check-in. That's basically all there is. It's just a refresh as to why we're here and what we're doing. That's the only thing I ever would do for the daily openings. The formal opening will have the things like working agreements, parking lots, other pieces like that. But that's the difference between. Let's get into all of the activities. Here we go. So after I'm done with all my questions, I've noticed they tend to fall into several categories. The first set of questions tend to focus on me. Who am I as an individual? The second set are who are we as a team? And And the third and fourth sets are around process and product. And the process and product ones are a little unique because they tend to be very contextual based on what I learned in the interviews. Some need a lot of help with process because they've never done anything like Kanban or Scrum or XP before. They just don't know, so we have to spend a lot of time there. Others, the product is brand new, but they've been doing Scrum for a while. So it changes pretty dramatically on these two. The me and we's, those are, to me, always on the table, no matter what anyone tells me. I've been in plenty of companies like, oh, we've worked together for years. We don't need to do this. Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. People who are staffed together are not necessarily teams. So I don't skip that pretty much on any case. So let's talk about how some activities for the me section. Who am I? It's a big question that we're trying to answer with all that. And the activity I was going to bring up is constellations. What are constellations? All right, cool. So, constellations. Really great group of activity. You can do it at a table, but I'm going to explain how you do it in a room. But you basically put an object in the middle of the room. Don't make it a movable one. I've watched people get hurt on like a rolling chair doing this, so keep it as a stationary object. You can get away with it. Have everyone gather around in a circle around the object, and just say the object's sort of our center of the universe. And I'm going to read a statement to you. If the statement's true for you, move closer to the object, the more true it is. The less true it is, move further away. Now, if it is you with 100%, touch it. Just touch it. Don't jump on it. Don't hurt yourself. And then that's it. That's how you introduce it. And I'll read a statement and let them move. And then I'll have them stand there and tell them to look at where everyone else is. Look at what everyone else has said about how true this is for them. What did you think you were going to see? What surprised you about that? And from then on, I read statements. And so there's a series of statements also provided in the guide. And they basically go down a easy set of statements, like kind of fun, lighthearted ones, and then they go into a different category, which is far more focused about where they work and their own opinions about work, which tends to get a bit more divergent. There'll be statements in there like, I think Agile is going to work for us. And you'll see some really interesting stuff when you see that one go out. After you do those, I turn it over to them, and I say, take an index card and a Sharpie, write down any statement you would like to see the room react to. I collect them all into a box or a bag so it's anonymous, and then I'll start reading them. And after about 5, I'll check in and see if they want me to keep going. I'll save you the trouble. They always want to see all of them. And the same thing. Move, look at where everyone is, see what surprises you, and keep going. That's constellations. After this activity, and just about after every activity, they need to be debriefed. So if you skip the debrief, you are skipping the part where they get to the answer of the question. Otherwise, they just went through some stuff and it doesn't have meaning for them yet. So debriefing is just as important as the activity itself. This debriefing 4 questions I stole from Esther Derby and Diana Larson's Agile Retrospectives book, but it's 4 basic questions. The first question is, what did you see, or hear, or notice, or observe? What are your senses telling you? The second question being, so what surprised you about that, or challenged you, or stood out about that? And that's sort of taking your observations and making something out of them, getting some information. And the third question is, so what does that tell you, or what insight do you have? Turning it into a personal meaning. That's the step, right? From senses to information to insight. And then the last question, which you may or may not need, is so what would you do differently? Or what change is this leading to? Turning it into something you could actually do something about. You may or may not need these questions for debriefing on activities. You'll know when it's appropriate or not. But debrief. You can ask the room the question. And just to make this a little bit, to tell you how I would do it, I'll show you exactly what I do. And I'll just tell you what goes into my head. I'll just verbalize it. So, I've been up here speaking a mile a minute for about 20 minutes. What have you noticed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Show of hands, was that all awkward? Yeah. Right? This side awkward, this side, that's cool. So the reason why I do that is, you ask these questions, these are big questions. It takes a while for people to come up with an answer for it. And then it takes even longer for them to share what they came up with. Counting to 10, as though they're seconds, gives people enough time to come up with the information and makes it just uncomfortable enough that someone will speak.
Do you count out loud, or you just count in your head?
I count my head. That's what goes on in my head. I don't count right in front of it.
That makes it a lot more awkward. I'm just saying.
Thank you for clarifying. Yes, I count in my head. I don't make a lot of eye contact. I will scan the room, but I'll wait 10 seconds before I say anything else, and that just gives people enough time to say anything. And once it starts, the whole room will begin to talk. So that's how you debrief when you ask these kinds of big questions. Just count to 10. Just wait. Let the silence do the work for you. Let's move on to the we section.
It seems to all be about the needs, and how does it get to answering the team questions in your agenda? You said that this is key. Debriefing helps you answer it.
Right, so when people go through an activity, they need to make some sense of it. It needs to have some meaning to them. So when they do the me part, the question that tends to correspond is, who am I? That's what they need to figure out. And so when they do this, they are having to basically assert their own truth by moving in the room, and they see what happens with everyone else. So not only are they declaring who they are, they're seeing how everyone else is declaring who they are at the same time. And when you debrief, they can begin to talk about what surprised them about that. What did that mean to them? I thought we were all on the same page about Agile, but we're not. Like, that begins to actually create meaning for them together. But they're saying things individually. So that's one of those activities. There's a couple others. There's Tribes is another popular one. And there's another one called Explain and Explore. All of them focus on individual truth that gets sort of synthesized back out as a group. I don't know if that helps exactly.
It does.
So let's talk about creating a team. These activities are largely design activities. They're not very experiential. And I don't know why I do it this way. It's just what I do. I tried to think about that as I was coming up. I was like, why do I choose to do it this way? And I was like, don't know. Could not come up with a good reason. So the first thing for a team is creating a vision. Who they wish they could be when they grow up. Their identity. Who they would say they are more than each individual. If you've ever tried to get a team to wordsmith any piece of anything, it takes forever to do that. So here's an activity from Lisa Atkins called 3.5. Anyone heard of this one? Okay. And this is really great because in about 10 minutes you can get a team to come up with any amount of text that you want without a whole lot of debate. So how it works is everyone gets index cards and Sharpies. Pitch the idea of a vision to the team. This is the identity of who you wish you could be. Your dream as who we wish we are as a team. Write down the one or two sentences that capture that vision on an index card. Then collect all the index cards, have the team self-organize into pairs, shuffle, mix the cards back out. And then I'm going to explain the next part. And I will say from my own experience, there is no way I can explain this that doesn't invite about 6 times of me having to clarify. So here we go. Basically, the pair is going to read each vision that they got. They're going to share it with each other, and then they're going to have to basically pick the best one. Now, the way you're going to pick the best one is I am basically going to give each of you 7 votes. Like your pair has 7 votes, or $7, or 7 points, however you'd like to think of it. But your pair has 7. And you're going to have to split that 7 across the 2 cards. One card might get 5, the other card might get 2. That adds up to your 7. The higher voted card is the one that wins, the lower voted card is the one that loses. You cannot split the points into decimals. There can be no 3.5s. One will always win. And then I put the pair to task of choosing with their votes. The question you will get over and over again is, so wait, each of us has 7 points? No, the pair has 7 points. It'd be like I gave the 2 of you $7 total, and you had to figure out how to split it. You'll get that over and over and over again. I haven't found the magic set of phrases that make that work. So you'll do all that, collect all the winners in one hand, the losers in another, redistribute the winners. If you have an even number of people, everything's going to work great. If you have an odd number of people, you will be out of cards. I just shuffle a loser back in. That's what I do to make it even. Shuffle it back out. And they keep doing this after several rounds. They will select one pair, will have the top 2 cards, and they will pick the winning card. And that's the winning card. So I'll bring it up and say, this is the vision that you all have selected, and I'll read it out loud, and then I say, can we start with this? I don't ask if this is perfect. I don't ask if this is good. I don't ask if this is what we want. I ask if this is what we can start with. Because that's what we are doing. We are starting. We are not saying forever. We're saying now. So that's a vision. It takes about 10 minutes to create a vision. From there, move into a values or alliance. Anyone built one of these before? This is essentially the same thing as the working agreements. I just frame it as every team needs a set of qualities or values or attributes that they hold themselves to. Something that if they held these would help them get to their vision. Their values or qualities. If they don't have an idea of what values are, you can recite the Scrum values or the Kanban values or point to a wall in the office and say, remember those things? Values. And basically the idea is I say, name anything that we value, we think we should value as a team, name it. And they'll say something to me. And I'll say, cool, what does that look like? What are you thinking of when you say communication? And I'll ask for an example. Then I'll say, cool, is that a value we can start with? The answer will generally be yes. Sometimes you'll get a debate because some of these words have a lot of meaning for people and they want to carve off some of the bad sides of it. Have that quick discussion like, okay, so we leave that part aside. Can we keep the good parts of communication? Yes, cool, done. And so once you carve off the meanings that people don't want, the word still remains, they understand the value, put it up there. And I only asked for 3 to 5. This is a team I booted up and I think they came up with 11. And it takes just a few minutes to pull this off. The idea is we're building a thread from vision to values, and then we move to the next part, which is working agreements. Built working agreements before? Yeah, so when I do this, I tend to split a easel post-it into 3 chunks. I split them into conflict, collaboration, communication. This is an arbitrary choice I made up. It's 3 C's, make me feel good as consultants, do something like that. So I split it up into that, and I say these are just starting categories. Any working agreement is fine, but if you don't have anywhere to go, pick some that help us think about what are the rules we would follow when we're in conflict, which is we're debating between ideas. We have many opinions. We're not sure where to go. Or we literally cannot agree, and we are arguing. What are the rules we follow in conflict? For collaboration, what are the rules we follow to bring out the best of who we are as a team together? And then communication. How do we stay in touch? How do we share? How do we talk? What do we follow there? And I just have them put them up there. What I do is say, write one rule on a sticky, come up, put it up, read it to the group, and wait to see if anyone has a question. Now, that seems very simple. Guaranteed, that's not what they're going to do. What they're going to do is sit and they're going to write every rule they could ever come up with right in front of them. And they're going to try to come up at the very end and start putting them all up, saying nothing, and walk away. That's what they're going to try to do. So the way I try to deal with that is just say, please just write one, do not batch them up. If you batch them up, you're going to find out someone else wrote the one you were thinking of, and you're going to be angry that you spent all that time. So come on up and just coach them through the first few. They'll still try to batch it, but after 1 or 2 times of basically losing time, duplicating work, they'll get over it and start doing it this way. That's how I do working agreements. This will keep popping back up throughout the workshop. These are the basic rules that a team follows no matter where they're doing or what they're doing. This has nothing to do with Scrum. It has nothing to do with anything other than them. They will refine it to add rules about how they do a process, or how they do a product, or how they work with stakeholders. This is the beginning. So now we have a thread of the vision of who we aspire to be, the values we think carry us there, and the rules that we will follow to get us there. It's a whole thread all the way through. And at this point, there's one more activity I want to bring up called Market of Skills. Anyone done this one? Cool. Market of Skills is a very versatile tool. I'm bringing it up here because it can be, this is the first time that in a workshop I could use it. You can use it at any point. The idea here is that everybody will need to get a easel post-it, markers, and you're going to tell them that you want to imagine a market stall, like a busy, bustling market. All these stalls are out there hawking their wares, and you're one of them. So what I want you to do is build your own market, and what I want you to think of is put your market into 2 sections. The things you're selling, which are the things you're good at, the things you can offer someone else. The other section are the things that you buy, the things you want to have. And build your market, make it colorful, make it fun, because at the end, you're going to show off your market to the rest of the team. And they ask for examples of what should they be selling. And I was like, well, if you're a developer and you're great at Java, you're selling Java. If you really like tennis or bees, you're selling bees. Put it up there. This is everything you offer. This is everything you can do. And the things you want to buy, everything you want to buy, put it up there. Don't limit this to the idea of work. Great things can happen when we talk about everything. So I give them a few minutes to do that. You can also do this in pairs or tables. It's fine. And then at the end, they have all their markets up. The rest of everybody comes up with stickies and Sharpies. the person presents their stall, and people can say, yeah, you know what, I think we do need Java. And they write down basically who is doing the buy order for what, and they'll put it up. Or they'll say, you know what, I can sell you beekeeping information, put it up there. Some of the coolest things I've seen happen with this were partially related to de-risking the project because we realized we did not have a cross-functional team. This told us that immediately. The other cool thing that I saw was that a group of people that were interested in tennis formed an after-work tennis club.
The skills your team has or the team needs?
So it would be both. So if you're building your stall, you're offering what you have. If you wanted to learn something, you would put that. But then in the interaction at the end, that's when they find out whether they have everything they need or not. Like, could they buy everything at their market? You can debrief it that way. That's usually what I would do. So that's market skills. With that, I use the last question. Are you ready to be a team? This is the end of the B session. Are you ready to be a team? The way I do that is a fist of 5. Remember this one? Alright, cool. I'll only have 5 points for the fist of 5. If you see a 2 or a 1, you gotta stop. You cannot say, cool, let's hold your concerns until later and move on. You have to stop right then and deal with that. And you have to be very careful because it takes a lot of courage to throw a 2 or a 1. So you have to be careful. You may have to work anonymously from this point forward to deal with whatever's holding us back. I will say in my experience, when I see a 2 or 1 at this point, it's usually because they didn't understand the agenda and they're like, well, we don't even know what we're building. Like, no, that's literally day 3. That's day 3. Oh, cool, 4. That's how that goes for me often in this case. But be very careful with fist of 5s, because if you see a 2 or a 1, you gotta stop. And it takes, that's tricky. It's really hard to figure that one out. I would say give it a lot of thought. Do a fist of 5 and stop on a 1 or 2. But it's the correct course of action to think about it that way. All right, process. How are we doing? Doing okay? Cool. Process. I'm gonna gloss over a few things here because every activity here is far too big for me to explain. Good news is, next door, the next session is going to cover the one I was going to recommend, which is the ballpoint game. If you're doing Scrum, ballpoint game is by far my favorite. Within 15 minutes, you can give a very fun, experiential Scrum or iterative development-like experience. It's a blast. This ballpoint game, the Lego game, and the paper airplane game are the top 3 that I know about for Scrum. Lego game is, I think, the most popular. It takes a lot of supplies. It takes a lot of other things. Paper airplane game is also great. It takes fewer supplies, but again, it takes about 2.5 hours. Ballpoint game is great because you get to walk into work with a stack of ball pit balls or ping pong balls and then say, yep, I'm professional. Ballpoint game is my favorite. And you can tailor it a lot to highlight different aspects of where you understand we need to focus on. So it's very customizable and it's a hoot. If you want to see it in action or discover more of it, like I said, next door, Matt McLaughlin is doing the ball. So this is the idea to cover process stuff. You're going to do Kanban. I think Kanban pizza is like the activity you do. Paper airplane can easily be modified to do it. There are variations of the Lego game to do it. There's also the penny game that can do it. These are all options. Resource-wise, Tasty Cupcakes has a bunch of these out there. That's the website. The idea is that in this part, you need to get your team together and figuring out what process they're going to follow, whether it's Scrum, Kanban, some Scrum butt thing. I don't know what they're going to do. You'll find that out during your interviews, and this is the part where you begin to have an activity to experience it. You may have to blast out a PowerPoint and do some training, but you'll figure out what's the right mix based on your interviews, and I can't tell you what it will look like. If we're going to touch Scrum, I will do ballpoint game, because again, it's 15 minutes, it's a blast, and highlights a lot of great things. If I'm doing Scrum, I usually will put a slide out there of things that are not in Scrum. User stories are not in Scrum. Stand-ups are not in Scrum. And I'll have a slide full of those things, because many teams have adopted all these practices, thinking that's what it is. And so I'll take them away and say, that's not part of it. What do you want to do instead? That's just a little thing I do. But that's process. And after you're done with this, you'll probably need to create a definition of done, maybe a definition of ready. The technique I use for this is from David Koontz, and it's hard to see this, but this is actually a bullseye. There's a smaller square, a middle square, and an outside square. Middle square says now, or the inner square says now, the next ring is next or then, and the outer ring is later. And the idea with the definition of done and ready would be that what are the things that we follow now when we say we're done? What are the things we do now? Put those out. What are the things that will be even better than that? Put them in the next or the then. Or what are the things that would be impossible, but great, put them in the later. And this is one of the moments where I will break rank as a facilitator. And the reason I'll do that is this is one of the moments where I have a certain amount of expertise. Because a lot of teams I've noticed have worked the same way for quite some time. And so what I need to do with them is, hang on. Okay. They've worked their way so long that they actually don't know what else is possible. And so I will break as a facilitator and say, would you like me to bomb this as a software developer? Or bomb this as a product owner? And I will tell you everything that exists out in the world as an option. And they will say yes. They have no idea what they just asked for. And so that's when I will break rank, and I will put stickies all around the later column about things like test-driven development, mock programming, pair programming, TDD, BDD. I will just go crazy bombing them, and we'll talk about it. The idea is after they're done with all this, they have their now, and I'll ask them, so is this comfortable for you? How hard is this? Is this something you stretch to do every time? The answer is probably going to be no. They do this all the time, don't worry about it. But cool. What can you pull in from then that would improve how you're working? What would improve quality? What can you pull in now? So now, stretch yourselves. We'll move on over. And this is how we do definition of ready. And what's interesting about this is this artifact is great fuel for future retrospectives. Because then when we come back and say, so how are we doing with this? Remember we said we wanted to do a design review. That would be better. Is that still relevant to us? Could we change to do that now? Right? This is a self-created artifact that has a roadmap of improvement for them built in. So it's pretty cool. Definition done already. Last thing you may need to do is update your working agreements. They have rules like, we're going to start our daily scrum at 9:15 every morning, and they want it written down, write it down and put it up there. I would say in my experience, very few teams care about that level of detail. They're more than willing to trust the scrum master to deal with that kind of level of administration, but they may want to update it after that. I will say the exception to that is I have had teams put rules in like everyone attends the retrospectives. That's what I've seen actually come up. So with that, that's done for process. Product. Ready? Here we go. So if you're going to have to go into the product discussion, you may have to go back to pre-work. And here's a sort of short list of things you may have to do pre-work-wise to get into a product discussion that's going to be actually fruitful. Skipping some of this could lead to not fun times. So you may have to identify a product owner. And I say that because you might be told, this is the product owner. They may not be the product owner. There may be someone else actually taking all the responsibility and doing the work of the product owner. Find them and work with them and bridge the gap early. Because you need a product owner to talk about product. If they've been misidentified or given the wrong role to the wrong person, you need to find that out first before you have them go into the room and make a mess of everything. You may need to work with them to identify a vision or a challenge for the product. Many product owners walk into the room with a list of work to be done, and there isn't a clear point to it. It's not to say it doesn't exist, but they don't know it. So you may need to work with them to build a challenge or a vision, to break the scope into something that is meaningful that can be sliced. You may need to work with them to identify outcomes. Many people I work with don't know what an outcome is. They think of an outcome as how many work items have we completed, which is output. So you may need to work with them to frame what is an outcome, what are likely ones, what is the business looking for out of this. You may need to have those discussions beforehand. You may need to have them start thinking about personas. Many of them that I work with don't know who a single user actually is. It's just a vague idea that they were told that people care about what it is they're doing. You may need to start working on who these people actually are. And the last thing is you may need to know about larger constraints that exist. Time and budget, for example, could be big ones that you need to know about. That purpose I identified earlier, radical success within 6 months, that's a constraint I was able to figure out. They had a hard deadline of 6 months before this thing was going to be, had to stop. I knew that going in, so I could frame it that way. So this is stuff that could identify your pre-work. As you do your interviews, you may realize you have all this other stuff to do too. Because what I would go into next is story mapping. I'd say it's the only one, but it's my favorite one. Book by Jeff Patton, User Story Mapping, is a great book that covers all of how to do this. It also covers a lot of what agility looks like from the perspective of the product owner, so it's a great book for a lot of reasons. But the basic idea that I will cover very, very briefly, and there's a short guide in the resource guide I'm going to give you. Actually, show of hands on this one. Arms rolling, say yes. Not quite yet. I will say this. This is best done as a group, not as an individual effort. So that's why we'll do it in a boot up. It gives ownership of what the product will become to the whole team, not just the product owner. Mapping users all the way to an outcome and trying to get them there is often a very, very challenging thing that is best done as a group. And the next part that's really great is slicing the releases out to be as thin as possible. You can do a really fun thing as a leader or a coach or a scrum master by doing a rough calculation of the work they did not do as money they just saved the company that may have potentially given them an outcome. Compare that to the work they thought they had as a work to be done list. You just paid for the workshop and the other thing you wanted to do. So that's story mapping. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about it. It's a really great activity. It takes 4 to 6 hours, my experience. So it's a whole day. The other thing we need to do is stakeholder map. Show of hands on this one. Basic idea is that you want to ask the group, like, so we have our beautiful little team, and they're wonderful, but they work in a company and the world around them, and they have different interests and influence over us. We want to know who they are to formalize our strategy about how we engage them. So you have them just identify everyone that's interested or has influence in this. And I map them across 2 axes, influence and interest, because that forms the basic strategy that we use for these people. And so starting with the top left, which is least interest, highest influence, that category is meeting their needs. They're the ones that are just going to make a demand and walk away. You have to meet their needs. Now, subtle strategy would be how do we get them from these low interest people to high interest people? Because then they're engaged instead of demanding. The top right, high interest, high influence, these are key players. These are people that, in my experience, the product owner has to work very closely with. They have to be involved in things like reviews and their own planning and their own groomings behind the scenes to make sure these people are very, very much engaged in everything. Coming down, high influence, low interest, or low interest, high influence. These are your show considerations. They need to be talked to. They need to be like, hey, we know you're here. We still care about you. We're just not doing anything. And then the lower left, the least influence, least interest. They're the least important. You may have to pay an occasional, like, we did stuff, cool, you're still there. The idea is that you do this activity and then you have a team actually come back and say, seriously, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to communicate? How does this influence who you invite to your ceremonies? How will you communicate with these people? What are you going to do to make these stakeholders work for you instead of against you? Do that now. I do that as part of the product conversation because these people often control marketing, money, legal, staffing. If you're working with contractors or vendors, they'll be up here somewhere. They'll be there. You need to know how to work with them. So with that, that's where I would end product. So we've covered the 4 quadrants at this point, and the way I usually will end at that point is saying, okay, we have our purpose. What else is missing? What is missing before we can start as a team? What's missing before we see our missions accomplished? And I introduce backpack. Anyone ever see this one? Ben Linders did this one? Yeah. The idea is to give them a metaphor. We're going on a journey. That journey is complicated. We're all going together. So we need to pack things into our backpacks to make sure our journey is successful. So anything you think we need, anything at all that would make our journey successful, put it in the backpack. And I'll brainstorm and put stuff in there. And then I'll go through each sticky and basically say, is this something we already have? Or is this something we need to go buy again from some store? And I'll do that for each one. And sometimes they're partially there, sometimes they're not. And this tends to form the, so like here we have a set of done. These are things that they knew they needed, that we'd actually already accomplished. And here's a whole pile of things that they thought they still needed after the workshop before they'd be successful. These turned into an action item lists at the end. Something I've started doing recently is I introduced the backpack way at the open. And that way, so the parking lot is there for things that are off topic, not going to accomplish our purpose. The backpack is the things that will accomplish our purpose that we have not discussed enough or yet. and so they can always fill it up. And then at the end, we can kind of go through it all. But this turns into an action item list in the end. That's how it generally goes. And the action item list is not for me. I already have enough to do wrapping all this up without taking all the actions at the end. We want this to be something they own. And with that, we are ready for the last question, which is, are you ready to start? And that gets a fist of 5 at the end. Now we cover the 4 quadrants on 3 whole days of facilitation. You ready to close? So closing, just as a note, build time into close every day. The elements of closing are kind of just the opposite of a opening. And so what I will do, because I usually run out of time, is I will summarize what we've done today. Now it's better if you're going to have them do it as an activity. In the last formal close, I will have an activity for them to do it, but I will just summarize for them. And then I'll usually ask a question at the end. So what's one thing that you got out today? What's one insight you had? What's one goal you saw accomplished? And I'll have them answer that. And then with that, I'll deal with any sort of last-minute remarks about what time we have to open tomorrow or whatever, anything like that. And then the formal close, I will have a formal activity for them, and usually it'll be something like mind mapping. Get together as a table and mind map what all has happened in 3 days for you. Or do a journey line. Anyone familiar with journey lines? Let's get to the mind mapping. Okay, so journey lines, I didn't have a diagram for this, but you have an axis vertical of like your mood of miserable at the bottom and happy at the top, and then you have a x-axis of time. And you just have them draw a line of what their mood was like throughout the 3 days. And they can mark the peaks and the valleys with certain events. And they can do it as a group and have different lines or whatever. If you need a stakeholder, if a stakeholder is insistent on coming in that you could not allow in, that's the time to bring them in. It's right then during the last close activity, because that's the time when the group is about to report back amongst themselves everything that's happened. And that's going to be the best bang for the buck for them to come in, because it's by then the team's done all the work. They've already committed to being a team. They're ready to go, and now a stakeholder gets to come in when you're saying, this is all the amazing stuff that happened. That's the time to do it. So that's how I'll do that. And the other thing I'll do during a close is I will hang up on the exit wall, on the door, a little easel post-it with a plus minus delta retrospective format, and just ask them for feedback. And I'll do this every single day with them. And I just say, look, if anything went well, put it in the plus. If anything didn't go well, put it in the minus. Anything you want changed, put it in the delta. If you put nothing, I will go home and think, there's no possible way I could have done this better, and you will get more of the same. That guarantees I get lots of C's. So that's how I do that. And that's the end of this facilitation piece. The last piece would be follow-up. The main thing here is, when you're done with all this, there will be lots of pictures to take. You'll have to capture this and put it in Confluence where information goes to die. You'll have to go talk to the stakeholders and give them a report out if they weren't allowed to join. You're going to have to take care of a lot of administrative pieces, and the last thing that you'll have to do is go talk to the people that you interviewed and see if their needs were met. See what things didn't get addressed for them. See what the reservations are moving forward. Find out what was missed, what was not said. That's how you can finish it up, and that can take several days to weeks to finish, because by then, things have gone on. I will say there's a question I generally get, which is, so what happens tomorrow? And then I'll tell them, show up for a daily scrum, 9:15. Go from there. That's usually how I'll end it. And with that, I do want to bring this to a close. Again, here's all this information. The QR code has the link to the reference guide if you want to try to take a picture now or wait for the slides, that's fine. And here are references to the various activities I did and where you can find out more about them. Well, with that, do I have any time for questions? What's happening at the end? Am I over? Oh my gosh! What questions do you have?
If you have a part of your team remote, do you have advice or things you could do to...
Almost everything I just told you doesn't work.
I want to say the whole time.
Yeah, so I specifically didn't try to tackle remote because that is a very tough one to do. A lot of activities can be modified to remote. My best advice would be if one person is remote, everyone has to be treated that way. And so you can modify a lot of activities to work remotely, especially with tools like Zoom with breakout rooms, collaborative whiteboarding tools. You can accomplish a lot of these things by getting creative with that. Many of the discussion-based activities I'll use Google Docs for, or Whiteboard or Trello, and that gives me a close approximation to most of these activities. But The really hard part is saying there's a group of us in the room and then there's a handful out there. That's the really hard side. So I just have everyone work on their laptops and then I just do it 100% remote from that point forward. And that's at least everyone's the same.
Do you talk to the team about how you measure success and or failure during this process? So let's say it's 3 months from now, everyone's agreed we're going to do this cool new thing. Is that brought up at any point in this conversation?
So on a product level, we'll come out during their story mapping part, where we'll talk about the outcomes they're working towards. From a team level, I would say that tends to come out during the process talk of like, so if we're going to do Scrum, how do we know that was working for us? There might be a metric conversation there. That's usually one of the things where, again, I'll have to sort of knock off the facilitator hat and say, these are all the things we could look at. And I'll just say, pick a few to start.
And one word, it's safe for me to assume that, I assume everyone's bought in, after the 3-day thing, everyone's ready to go in the morning. So when you say you're ready to start, is it mostly like, yes, you're ready to go, or everyone's like, oh God, no, forget all Scrum?
So the last, I would say, in my experience, when I say ready to start, that may have been a slight mistake when I put that out there. What it really means is, was the purpose achieved? Did we create a team with a chance of rapid success for success?
All right, cool, thank you.
That's the specific thing. And I'd say most of the ones I do like this, by the time they end in the fist of fives or fours and fives. And they're usually, from that point on, they will ask me to facilitate every meeting that they ever have. They're very happy about that result.
Okay, thanks.
Could you put the QR back on?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes.
I was trying to take notes furiously, and I may have missed it. The purpose of the close, other than just to say thanks a lot, is what?
So the purpose of the close is basically to give everyone a little bit of time to digest the entire day or the entire workshop. So ideally, there's enough time built in for them to go through one more activity where they can kind of digest. And just like you debrief every activity, the close is a debrief on the day or the workshop. If you have time, you do want an activity to do something like that, I always run up with time against the wall. So I'll summarize what we did and then ask them one question that's sort of a quick, think about everything, what's the one thing you took away from today? And that's sort of my quick and dirty way of accomplishing that when I have no time. Mind mapping or journey lines is a better way to close it. You could also do something called 1, 2, 4, which I'm learning about, called from liberating structures. There's lots of ways to do it. The more time you give to it, the better. But it's about distilling what's happening for the whole day. Other questions? Yes?
What sort of challenges do you run into when you're trying to do something like this with a team where, let's say the team's adopting a particular methodology, but there's in a company, organization where the teams around them are not adopting that same methodology. Maybe you're experimenting with the company's a typical waterfall scenario and they're trying Scrum with this one team. What are some of the challenges that you run into, things you do with this sort of team launching to address that ecosystem problem?
I would say most of those problems are resolved during the sponsor reviews. And when I'm talking with them and I ask them questions about, so what is this whole Agile thing about? Where are we going? What are you looking for? What do you want out of this team? It's usually not compliance with SAFe or Scrum. They want teamwork for a change, and they want something that accomplishes something. And I'll straight up ask them permission, like, is it cool that we may go a slightly different route? And you can always come back to me and ask me how it's going, and we can always hold ourselves back to that same standard of not compliance, but are we delivering results? And I usually have very little pushback on that level. But it happens during the sponsor, where I basically formally ask for permission to allow the team to deviate. Yes?
What happens if somebody joins your team after you went through the 3 years and then you don't have time?
Yes, that's the question I forgot to answer during all this. So it goes back to how long should your boot up be, and that question about what happens when someone joins or changes influences this. So a 3 or 4 day boot up assumes a reorg or a new team and a new product, or enough of a changes happen. I would say if like one person changes and they're not a key member of the team, you can knock this down to a few hours, where you're basically going to refocus on, does the vision hold true, are our agreements the same, just retouch those same elements that we've all created together, and that could just be a few hours. But again, I would still go through the same basic process of interviewing people and finding out if that's actually what's relevant to them. And same thing with the new person. And then I would go back through even if it's a light touch, the me and we aspect of this, just to make sure that's covered. And that me and we piece, if you stretch it out and do a lot of stuff, could take a whole day, but you can also compress it down to 2 hours by focusing on just important pieces. That's what I look at is, if someone changes on the team, this begins again to me.